Hello, everyone. My name is Elisa Ewan, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Teachers College. Thank you for joining us today for our Alumni Career Development webinar, which is co-sponsored by TC Next and Alumni Relations, and it covers a range of career-related topics and features speakers from a variety of industries. This is one of the many ways you can stay engaged to your TC family. I'd like to quickly remind you of a few more ways you can maintain a meaningful connection with TC. 1. Hire TC students and alums. 2. Refer prospective students back to the college. 3. Show your pride by including Teachers College in all of your professional credentials. 4. Share your talents and expertise by volunteering to speak at TC events or by joining one of our Alumni Association committees. And 5, when the time is right for you, support TC financially by donating to the TC Fund. We are especially grateful for the TC alumni who share their knowledge through insightful presentations, like the one we're about to hear, for all of the TC community to learn together. And now I would like to introduce today's event presenter, alumna Samir Abdul Kareem, who will be presenting Designing Your DEI Strategies, Tips for a Small Organization. Samira is an organizational psychologist with over 10 years of experience in diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting, leadership and development, designing learning strategies, coachings, and facilitation. She is the co-founder and principal consultant of Hyphens and Spaces, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion company for organizations committed to furthering social causes and the public good. Samira consults with organizations to generate and execute DEI strategies that create more equitable institutions and that support underrepresented and marginalized individuals within them. She takes a human-centered approach to organizational development and change by designing thoughtful interventions that leave team members and clients feeling empowered and connected. Samir holds a master's degree in social organizational psychology from TC and a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Wesleyan University. Samir will be taking questions from the audience during the latter part of our event, so feel free to drop any of your questions in the Q&A pane below. We will be utilizing the chat during today's workshop, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical or audio issues, please do not hesitate to reach out to us via the chat and let us know how we can help. And without further ado, please help me welcome Samira.
Thank you so much, Elisa. I'm so excited to be here with you today. I am looking through the chat and seeing that we've got people from all over the country and from different parts of the world. So happy you were able to join today. Let's dive in. So this, just a little bit more about me, about Hyphens and Spaces. So as Lisa mentioned, we are an organization a diversity, equity, and inclusion organization that specializes in working with organizations that serve the public and the public good. So this could be nonprofits, social entrepreneurships, or really any organization that seeks to fill a human need. And we're interested in serving those folks because it helps us bridge the gap between their good work and the necessary work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Doing that leads to really powerful and real changes in the life of the people in those institutions and all the people that they serve, most especially those who have been systematically marginalized in society and by institutions. So our team at Hyphens and Spaces is made up of some beautiful professionals with lots of different skills and backgrounds and experience types. As mentioned, I'm a Teachers College alumnus. I completed a master's in social organizational psychology and been leading DEI work professionally for several years now. Though personally, I've really been developing this muscle my whole life, this muscle of translating experiences, cultivating cultural competence, and really seeking to make more authentic human-to-human connections, because at the heart, that's really what DEI work is, in my belief. I'm super excited for this talk today because I've seen how developing a clear DEI strategy can be really motivating and grounding and transformational in and of itself for both teams and institutions. And another defining belief of our team at Hyphens and Spaces is that DEI work is work that everyone has the ability to do. And our role as DEI partners is to equip our clients with knowledge, perspective, and coaching to carry out their work. And so our focus is always going to be on capacity building for that ongoing work, because we know that this is a sustained journey that takes long-term commitment. So that brings us to our session objective. Our goal today is to better equip participants, that's you, to create effective and purpose-driven diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. So said another way, I'm going to be offering some tools and grounding in one method to address this work of capacity building around DEI strategy through strategic planning. And I emphasize one method, right? There's a lot of different ways to get at the same result. And I'm going to offer one way that I found really effective. So as we dig in, I'm curious to hear from you. So please share in the chat. Considering this objective, what is one thing that you want to walk away with as a result of this session? This could be, I want help thinking about how I can create realistic goals. Or I want to understand how to gain traction in my organization to generate more interest around DEI. So feel free to add to the chat, what is one thing that you want to walk away with out of this hour we're going to spend together? I see some things rolling in, communication strategies. Please keep those going. Next steps, awesome. More comfort all around with DEI. Beautiful. Scope and sequence, awesome. Keep those going. I want to be able to tailor some conversations to what you share. But I'm going to keep moving and then be able to tie some of those things in that you share as I go. So the thing I want to talk to right now is the elements of a DEI strategy. So we're going to discuss these 4 elements today, starting with vision and then moving to purpose, goals, and timeline and accountability. When we're talking about vision, we're asking, what do we actually want to achieve? For purpose, why do we want to achieve it? The goals is how we're going to get there. And then the timeline accountability is really about the plan of action. These are elements that we found are most valuable to small organizations. Strategies can be much longer than this. They can include a lot of different elements in different phases, depending on the complexity of your work and the size of your organizations, how many constituents you offer. There might be multiple layers to your strategy. But we found that these elements are so essential because they really start to set the foundation for the process of developing the strategy. The process that you need to undertake as a team to get to these answers is really where the kind of juice is, right? So to arrive at the vision, for example, you have to ask yourself what you're aiming to achieve with this work and what happens if you don't. Like, what's the consequence of not investing in this work for your industry, for your organization, for your constituents? So that process of reflection and listening and observation and conversation can be transformational for the folks that are leading these conversations. Lots of organizations have different structures for strategies. Some are more narrative-based, some like charts and statistics, etc. So just consider this a framework that you can adapt to your needs and to your style. But make sure that when you are developing your strategy, that these elements are present and that these questions are answered. Okay. Awesome. Okay, and I'm just taking another look at some of the questions that you all, or some of the goals that you have for this session. Awesome. How we start these conversations, a better understanding of what it takes to have an effective strategy. Great. We'll dig into each of those things. Okay, so let's start with the vision and what those elements can entail. So I aim in most strategies to keep the vision really brief, like typically one sentence. And it's to summarize the future that the organization wants to live into. Like, what's the future that you're painting, right? Your vision for what's next. It should be broad enough to feel aspirational, but then specific enough to guide your work. So it should focus on what you're broadly aiming to achieve as an outcome as an outcome of your efforts. So organizations who provide direct service may consider creating a separate vision for their internal work and their external work in order so that broadness doesn't conflict with your internal and external goals. But the statement should be simple. It should be inspirational and it should be aspirational. So we're like a not good statement would be, we want to be a company where people can participate, right? People are probably already participating in your organization, right? So if they weren't, they probably wouldn't be working there anymore. So there's no inspiration in that, and there's no aspiration in that. Also, like what would be an example of a not good statement is, we want to be the very best version of ourselves, right? There's a lot of inspiration in that statement, but there's no specificity. I'm kind of like, oh, what does that actually mean? What does the best version of yourself look like, right? So you want to make sure that has it's both inspirational and aspirational, and then it gives you some focus. It's really important to establish your vision, because in having these conversations about where you're aiming for, you create alignment in your organization. So again, like the vision statement is not as the 100% as much the goal. It's to have the conversations about where are we aiming to go. So it really, and when you get there, it really means that your team is moving in the same direction with a shared aim. I'm going to show you an example of a really strong vision statement. It's from UC Davis Medical School. It reads, "Our vision is to develop and nurture a community where everyone can reach their full potential in the medical microbiology and immunology department at UC Davis." So what they're aiming to achieve here is a community where everyone can reach their full potential, right? This is inspirational. I'd love to be a part of a community where people are invested in developing my potential. And it's also aspirational because it's ongoing, right? They're interested in nurturing and developing this thing. So this should be as clear. This DEI vision statement should be as clear to you as your organizational vision and mission statement is to you. And they should also be integrated and part of your long-term strategic plan. Let's move now to talk about purpose, the next section. So your purpose is about articulating your why for DEI work. This section of your DEI strategic plan should really describe why your organization aims for this vision. Some folks are really focused on making the business case for DEI, which I completely appreciate, because that research around, what the benefits of DEI is in organizations is really important. And with knowing that, like that research around business case, each organization still needs to establish its own business case. Whether it's a morally based case, values-based, finance-based, maybe it's about the quality or effectiveness of the work that you do, where DEI is necessary to ensure quality or effectiveness. So you need to define that for yourself. And doing so really helps build the foundation for institutionalizing DEI work. So that it doesn't just become an interest of a particular person in charge of a particular group, but really a part of how the organization operates. So the next piece that also works with that idea of institutionalization is ensuring that your statement is binded to the institutional mission and goals. So you have to ask, how does this relate to or advance your overall organizational mission or your goals? How does it utilize your strengths and your organizational values, or articulate further your organizational values? How does it tie with your strategic goals and outcomes, right? So all of those things need to kind of be thought through and incorporated to your purpose statement, which can be a couple of paragraphs. And the last piece is ensuring that this defines the terms in ways that are meaningful to you and to your stakeholders. So that means your stakeholders, both internal and external to your organization. A teaching hospital, like UC Davis, will think really differently about the populations that they seek to serve than a VC firm, right? There's nuance to what these words mean, which populations we're targeting. All of that changes based on our organization and our organizational goals. So this is a chance for you to define the terms as you understand them. What do you mean by diversity and equity and inclusion? Which populations are you interested in serving and targeting with these work, and why? Why are you gauging those populations? Why does that matter to your organization, and what kind of gap are you aiming to address? So overall, a purpose statement often comes in the form of a DEI statement that demonstrates a belief and a commitment to DEI work. So it is taking a stance around a belief, which is a really important thing. So let's look at an example of how that can show up. So you'll see all these examples have to do with UC Davis School of Medicine. I just thought it would be nice to have that together. They start with saying that UC Davis School of Medicine's mission is to provide excellent, learner-centered, so forth and so on. So they start by outlining their overall mission, which automatically says, okay, they're serious, right? This is about their reason for existing. And then the next line reads, to fulfill our mission, we must provide resources that promote equal access and opportunity for all people, which is a really important imperative, right? So they're claiming the urgency of this work. As it relates to their reason for existing as an organization, right? In order to fulfill our mission, we must do X, Y, and Z. And they say they must provide equal access. Great. So what's getting in the way of equal access right now, right? So in order to promote equal access, they've got to address social injustice. So they recognize in the next paragraph the present social injustices and racism that still exists within our nation. And that is what's getting in the way right now of their providing equal access. So recognizing that, they are seeking to embrace perspectives and experiences that arise from racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, sexual, gender, and religious diversity within their community. And so they're kind of naming which perspectives brought about by racial, ethnic, social, economic, so forth and so on, which types of differences are they seeking to honor in their work. And then they end with an overarching goal about to remove barriers for these populations of people to support justice and equity. So let's now move to the next conversation about goals. For your goals, consider goals that are going to be most meaningful to your stakeholders. Your goals should be specific and measurable and point to the outcome that you seek to achieve. For those of us who are familiar with like SMART goals and like all of these different kind of goal planning frameworks, it's going to sound familiar. That part of it is going to sound familiar. So your goals are best formed based on listening to and analyzing feedback from stakeholders in order to assess the gap between your vision and purpose and the current state. Your goals are meant to really fill that gap. And you won't know what the current state of experience is for your constituents until you engage them. You've got to ask, right? So there should be, so in your process, you're going to have to do some type of needs assessment, and whether that's through listening circles, focus groups, surveys, whatever makes the most sense for your organization, but you're going to have to listen and hear what's going on. And the goals that you come up with should address the needs of your community, different parts of your community, different stakeholders. They should also make use of your strengths and your resources and power as an organization. So this is using your value proposition, your organizational reputation, You might have financial resources at your disposal, or it could just be the expertise and skills of the humans in your organization, right? You should really be using all of that in order to, all of those features, all of your strengths should be present in your goals. And then the next piece is that it should be tied to the vision and purpose, right? You spend all that time developing your vision and purpose. You got to make sure your goals match with that. For each goal, you should have to ask, how does this help me achieve the vision? How does this help us satisfy our purpose? And if it doesn't do either, then it should probably be deprioritized as a goal. Your aim should be having a bucket areas of about 3 to 5 goals that are expansive enough to include various constituents and that will require a couple of steps to get there. So some examples of goals are, we want to reform our internal systems and processes in order to align with our renewed commitment to equity. Or we're interested in diversifying our member body to reflect the demographic population of the United States. Right. So those are kind of overarching goals that will require some steps in order to achieve them. Let's look at another example. Here we have the goal of being committed to and engaging the voices of our community to promote equity and compassion for all. And in that spirit, this is the constituents that they want to work with. So these are 3 separate goals. The first is to provide underrepresented groups better resources for educational plans and career development. Another goal is to invite, recruit, retain more underrepresented individuals into our programs through mentorship opportunities. And a third goal would be to care for and listen to those affected by inequity to foster unity and support for all of these various constituent groups that they listed above. So here is a step in the same vein for goals. So you can imagine each of these goals will have multiple steps. For example, to better provide resources to that first goal, you'll need to understand the current resources that you do offer, learn about what's missing from them, and learn about that from people that are utilizing those resources. So there'll be multiple steps that come under that goal. Okay. Let's move to our final piece about the timeline. So your timeline is essentially your plan of action. So for each goal, you're going to outline which steps are you going to take, over what period are you taking those steps, right? Each step, when are you going to do it, by when? You're going to select somebody who's going to be accountable. That means somebody who's going to have ownership over this area. And then how you're going to declare how you're going to measure and share the results that you come up with. Again, so this might sound familiar for folks who do a lot of goal planning or use a lot of goal planning methods. You can use whichever goal planning method works for you. And this should be really treated like any other high stakes mission defining goal in your organization. So you'll utilize the system that works best, but do consider all of these, at least all of these areas when selecting your goal. So let's take a look at what the steps might look like when we are building out our timeline and accountability section. So if we were to look at that goal, I think was number 2 from that previous slide, invite, recruit, and retain more underrepresented individuals into our programs through mentorship opportunities. The action steps that might entail would be to first gather the demographic data of those students, postdoctoral scholars, scientists, et cetera. If you're going to kind of recruit and retain, underrepresented individuals, you got to understand who are the underrepresented individuals and what are our numbers look like right now, right? If you're interested in recruiting and retaining, then there's an implication of increase. So you've got to understand what's happening right now. And then the action step 2 might be to assemble an interconstituency task force to actually design the mentorship programs that you're talking about, so that they can create continuity in the community, which is a part, like the goal is to ultimately be able to recruit and retain. So having that insight from that constituency be really important. And then step 3 would be actually have that task force, create a plan, and then you actually go out and start the recruiting of people for that mentorship program. So this is kind of an example of how you might break down this goal into really specific action steps. And I'm going to show you a little chart that I find really helpful when working through the kind of timeline and accountability aspects. You start with just kind of writing your goal at the top of this table. You share, what your measures are, how you're going to share your results, and the action steps, time frame, and accountable person. I'll show you what a completed area of this would look like. So for the same goal of inviting, the measure that you might use is to have 15 pairings of mentorship protege pairings in your first year. And then you'll have a steady increase year over year of those pairings. And because it's an experiential experience, you might survey participants at the end and expect the net promoter score of 75, and then gather qualitative data on the impact of this program on people's attraction to the organization and then retention within it via focus groups, right? So those might be some measures that align with this goal. And then how you might share results, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, might be to deliver monthly updates to your DEI council. You can also use that council to help unblock any challenges you experience. You can assemble if you don't have a DEI council, you can assemble an internal task force to just kind of be your partners in this. And you'll share results via your student and alumni newsletters in the case of a university. And your accountable person might be the director of academic advancement. Notably, that person is not going to be doing all of these things, but that person is the accountable person, meaning the person that's taking ownership over this area and will empower other folks or offer resources and guidance to other folks who might have different areas and tasks who will be responsible for carrying out these action steps. So that brings us to the last of it. I'll offer one more thing. So each of this kind of timeline accountability should be created for each of your goals. If you realize that you only have, you have 4 goals and you do this whole process and you realize that there's only one accountable person for all of these goals, then your goals may not be broad enough, or they might be too focused on only one stakeholder population. These goals that you establish should be really embedded to how you operate as an organization. So the diversity of departments and individuals within them who are driving this work should be reflected in your action plan, right? There should not be one person on this accountability list across all goals. All right. So that really concludes the outline of each stage of this journey. In a moment, we're going to open up to questions. I see there's some things, some questions that you all have already started to surface, and also we can get to some of the aims that you all shared earlier. But I wanted to share that after this session, you're going to be sent a worksheet that outlines each of these elements. And this worksheet is really going to be a tool for you to begin your own work in this area. It offers, again, outlines for each of these elements with short descriptions of each. It provides examples of the example that I shared in this presentation. And it also offers prompts and questions for you to consider as you're defining your own vision, your own purpose, and getting to your goals. It offers prompts for you to kind of help you get started in those conversations. And if you are not joining us live here today and you're watching this as a recording, you can feel free to request a copy of the worksheet via our website, hyphensandspaces.com. You can request it via our contact page, or you can just send us an email at hello@hyphensandspaces.com. We'll be happy to share it with you for free. And just as an additional resource, if you are as you go through your work. All right. So I want to offer just a few more tips about how to address this work. Defining your vision and purpose is a step that many teams skip, or it's something that they might invest the least amount of time in. But those, like the vision and purpose, really provide the most grounding for your organization as you move through your DEI work, right? A lot of us skip to goals, like we want to increase our numbers, we want to do this or that, right? So I really implore you that you spend time with that visioning and purpose work, particularly the purpose work, because when the why and the vision are done, all of the other elements become a lot more clear. And if you feel stuck on coming up with a vision, then work on the purpose section first. This usually takes the most amount of time in terms of like collaborative teamwork. Of course, actually executing on your goals takes a considerable amount of time. But when you're in the design process, the purpose can take the most amount of time. And mostly because there may be a lot of different perspectives in your organization about the why, which is a beautiful thing. So you can, as an organization, it can feel like, you're spending a lot of time talking and seeking alignment, which is critically important. But, I know there's folks that are really doers and want to see that action and want to build on that momentum. So you can certainly take action while you're creating the vision and the why, as that actually might help illuminate the why for you. In that vein, I'm going to offer a few more tips for people who will be driving this work in their organization. The first is to remain self-aware. Bringing authenticity to this work really means noticing what triggers you, what excites you, what your somatic responses are, like what is going on in your body when you are doing this work, when you're asking these questions, when you receive pushback from other people. Noticing those somatic responses, identifying where they're coming from, like that's a huge part of DEI work overall. So do engage that as you are creating your strategy. And you can also build that self-awareness on your team and into your team dynamics so that you're encouraging your team to talk about this, to name it, to recognize what's going on with them as you're engaging in this work. The next tip is to engage with different groups. Don't keep this at one level of the organization or on one side of the organization, right? This is not a conversation that happens only in HR. It's not a conversation or that only happens with people in marketing, right? This is a conversation that happens on all levels of the organization, on all departments in the organization, and on all levels. This is not something that has a conversation only with the executive team or only with the board, or only with the direct. Like it should be throughout. This is an organizational wide conversation. The other piece is to learn as you go, which is hard. But I'm going to encourage you to get comfortable with imperfect action and partner that with accountability and responsibility for your impact. So acknowledge and celebrate your wins when you have them, and acknowledge and rectify any missteps and the impact that might have on certain populations and people. But I invite you to learn as you go, to be a little experimental in this process. And then the last is utilizing the tools for the outcome. What I mean by this is really like the process is the outcome. Anybody who spent more than 30 minutes with me in a session knows this is my mantra. One of the most important things about developing a strategy, an action plan, is not necessarily the plan itself, but the process you took to get the answers and the process you'll take to deliver on this action plan. You want to use inclusive and equitable processes in your discovery and in your development. Do the work that you want to see in the world while you're building that, right? If you're doing that, if you're utilizing inclusive processes and equitable processes, you're going to organically need to examine and confront your own current practices and what might be missing in there. You're going to have to cultivate conversation with your stakeholders. You're going to have to get deep understanding of your current state. And you're going to have to generate clarity around your commitment, raise awareness, take new actions and new behaviors. New behaviors lead to different outcomes. And that's what we're ultimately aiming for. Okay. So I want to offer a couple of quick action steps, and then we'll open it up to questions. So action steps for individuals. I know we have a lot of folks here who are associated with organizations or maybe leaders of their organizations. We also have some folks who are individuals seeking their own development and learning. What's beautiful about that worksheet is that you can use those same prompts to declare your personal commitment to DEI. You can ask yourself these questions and have your own kind of diversity, equity, inclusion action plan for your personal development and growth. And if you're doing that as an individual, be sure to identify both short-term and long-term goals. So like in the short term, I just really want to familiarize myself with certain terminology. And in the long term, I want to make sure that I'm engaging in behaviors that leave people empowered after interactions with me, right? So, and then there's going to be steps that you need to take in order to get to each of those goals, right? So it's important to go through the same process for your own individual commitment, and then to find accountability partners that can be with you, like kind of play the same game that you're playing. And then for teams, for organizational teams, again, take this worksheet, engage with colleagues in conversation using those prompting questions, review your existing collateral for inspiration and to draw connections to existing statements. Like we talked about this purpose statement, these vision statements. You might have all this, you might already have some of this embedded in your values or embedded in your code of conduct or in your strategic action plan or other things that you've already developed in your organization. Use those, this don't make it, you don't have to make it brand new if you've already got that embedded in how you operate. And then the last, of course, is to gather stakeholder feedback. Those conversations are normalizing the conversations around DEI is already a part of the work. That's a part of like the process being the outcome. So don't be shy in starting those conversations ongoingly. Okay. With that, I will open it up to questions and invite Elisa back to join.
Hi, Samira. Thank you so much. First off, for guiding us through this process. With everything that's been happening this past year, especially this past month, DEI work is so important. And I'm really glad that we can that you've introduced like how we can start these steps. So thank you so much, first off and foremost. Everyone, if you have questions for Samira, I know we already have some questions coming in. Please feel free to take a moment and type them in the Q&A pane and submit them. And we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. So the first question, Samir, we definitely saw this come in at the beginning, and this was something that a lot of people on the call are kind of interested in, is how do we even approach, DEI work with leadership and managers and things like that, especially if you're an entry-level person and you're not in a managing position? How do you even start introducing that idea to people who can really affect change within the organization?
Yeah, for me, this question this comes up a lot, and I think there are certainly tactics, but I think ultimately the leaders react to the urgent need, react to the, frankly, and that urgency can be from many different sources. And that's the kind of idea of that building out the why, like getting clear on the purpose. Is that urgent need because like employee experience is really suffering. Employee experience, there are groups, particularly marginalized groups in our organization, that just feel like they cannot fully contribute in the ways that's empowering because they keep getting biased feedback from their managers, or we keep experiencing interactions that cause harm with clients, and we're not sure how to rectify or address those things, and we need resources to do that, right? So there's identifying what the need is and sharing that up with leadership can start to produce that urgency as well. And you can also name that externally, right? So it's critical for our work, if we are a healthcare organization, to make sure we can serve every person that walks through the door. And right now we are only seeing these groups coming in, and it's like because our environment is not inviting enough for these other groups. So just shaping for leaders what the need is goes a long way. And then, of course, offering them like, here's some ideas about how to move it forward. It shouldn't be your job to solve the problem. And it also really helps leaders if it shows that, there's something that they can do right away to start to move this conversation forward. It can sometimes be intimidating to start this work.
Great. I mean, as a follow-up to that, what if, we have already introduced this idea to, the leadership team, really kind of expressing why this work is important and how it can, better affect change and how we, help our constituencies and things like that. But leadership is still hesitant, or they're being defensive, or they're not understanding their own biases towards it, or like the privilege that they have. How do we overcome that barrier to really get that buy-in from leadership so we can affect change within our organization to help, these other, people that we're not reaching out to quite yet?
Yeah, I mean, the documentation around it is what I've seen to be the most effective. If leaders are like there's awareness, like, yeah, we got to do this, but again, there's like not a lot of urgency, or I don't really get the impact. Like documenting the impact and sharing it back with them is a really effective way of starting to have people recognize, like, if I don't handle this, I'm going to get called out on Twitter. Or like, if we don't do something different, right, we're going to be on the defense rather than the offense with this, especially in our current culture right now. There's like, if you don't have that level of awareness around like the real impact and the public expectation that you're taking this conversation seriously, then I think you're disconnected to what the reality is and what employees are seeking and what consumers are seeking right now, right? There is an expectation. It's no longer a curiosity, and nice to have. There's an expectation that you are engaging these conversations some way in an organization, and I think recording the impact of not with leaders can sometimes be another nudge in the direction of, okay, it's time to take action now.
Awesome. Thank you. In that same vein, earlier you kind of talked about, having conversations with your stakeholders, both internally and externally. The thing about DEI, sometimes that conversation, people feel very sensitive about it. And to have a conversation with both internal and external stakeholders, sometimes you want to make sure that you're creating a very safe and honest and authentic conversation around it. So how do we do that? How do we ensure we're getting that kind of feedback so we can create that work within the organization?
Yeah, I think why I love this question so much is that like the intention of taking care with people, I really respect and appreciate. When a lot of times we're beginning DEI work in our organization, there can be a lot of excitement. You think you're starting from zero, but you have to recognize if you're just starting, you're actually starting from negative. You're starting from not doing something that people might already need, and now you're trying to build that in. So there might be some work that you need to do to build trust and psychological safety, and ensure people that, like, by sharing their experiences, by contributing to our improvement as an organization, you're adding value and you're not setting yourself up for additional risk in your own experience and work or reputation or so forth and so on. And if you can't assure that, I actually would hold off on asking questions. Like I think, and instead seek those conversations with like leadership and to ensure that there is some space, or you can offer anonymity when you're asking, you're sharing, and so forth. I think that being protective over people's over the risk and vulnerability that it takes to share experiences around inclusion, particularly negative ones, I think is a really important thing to be attuned to. And so just offering the authenticity, offering the care, and then offering anonymity if that's necessary, if your environment doesn't have that psychological safety already built into it, I think is really can go a long way into encouraging that those conversations to happen. And then likewise, vulnerability is met with vulnerability. Go in with the interest and sharing, with appreciation for this person and their experience, with taking them in as a whole person rather than part of one identity factor that they hold. All of these help build a lot of connection and trust.
Thank you so much, Samir. I know that's been a question that we've kind of seen throughout the chat and in the Q&A. So I really appreciate your really thoughtful answer about that. So earlier when we were talking about the framework, you had mentioned, having someone accountable for, the goal and the tactics and the strategies. Not that they have to do all of it themselves, but they're, kind of project managing that. So one of the questions that we have is, how do you think about the roles around ownership of DEI initiatives? For instance, if you do have a DEI council or an advisory board, should they be the one owning this process with executive sponsorship, or should it be someone else? How do we figure out who owns DEI initiatives?
Yeah. I think the DEI committees and councils can play different roles in organizations. It depends a lot on the other resources in your organization, out of what idea the council even formed. And as you were forming, you probably established your own kind of charter and making sure you stay true to the charter. I don't necessarily think it's always best for the role of the DEI council to carry out the work. And I also, side note, DEI councils, people should be compensated and or recognized if they're a part of DEI councils. If it's not embedded in their role, then they're doing more work to improve the organization. That should be recognized. Side note, and I think they are a great opportunity for accountability. Like the DEI council are the group of people that are ensuring that some of those goals actually are being carried out. They can be used by the accountable people to help unblock blockers, to help gather feedback on and assemble other groups in order to get input on that. They can also be a body that receives feedback and input from people and are trained to do that in a way that engenders trust and anonymity and things that people need to feel that they can speak. So the councils do not need to be the bodies that carry out that work. There might be particular initiatives that the council takes or is better equipped to take over other constituents, but I think the council as a body of typically representative of different areas of the organization, different levels of the organization, should be a place where people can go to help move their work forward of their own DEI work in their departments.
Thank you so much. So we're getting a couple of questions, surrounding microaggressions and bias-related conducts. So what is your guidance in terms of microaggression and bias-related conducts when employees or supervisors display it to someone else? Both when, if you are a supervisor and you're seeing your employees do this, or if you're an employee and you see your manager, showing microaggression or bias-related conducts. What is your response protocol?
Yeah, I think like there's There are individual responses that for the people that are experiencing that bias behavior or microaggression, that relates to your empowerment, your safety, repairing the harm that caused for you. And also, if there was like a missed opportunity or like some injustice that happened, like an avenue for you to repair that injustice. Like, say you were not considered fairly for a promotion, right? That's something that has a material impact on your life and can cause harm. So you need to be able to have that repaired. There's also of course, the social emotional harm that this could cause. So I think there's like the caretaking that needs to happen for the individual that experienced that. And like recognition of that within the system, that there's harm caused that needs to be repaired with this individual. So having a protocol around that, I think, is really important for an organization. Then there's like the bystanders, the witnesses, the other folks that saw this happen. I advocate for being like an inclusive environment is one where people can name microaggressions and biased behavior when they show up. And then also that person that displayed that, again, even unintentionally, can recognize that had an impact, right? Their intention can be explored in their personal development process, that person needs coaching or learning programs or whatever it is. That's fine, where they can better match up their intent and impact, but that accountability for what happened needs to be with that person that demonstrated that behavior, as well as that attempt to rectify and make whole whatever happened. So I think their organizations to start to consider, like, what is our protocol, and document that. What resources do we have available for people who both experience these things, and for people who because we are in the education process, we know that not everybody is aware of their biases and how their microaggressions impact other people. So maybe there's resources available for those folks as well. But I think more importantly, it's just getting clear on what your organization is about. Like, some folks say we have a zero tolerance rule, but then you do nothing when these things happen, right? That's not zero tolerance. And if you're not a zero tolerance organization, it's like, no, we're actually interested in making sure that everybody feels supported, and we're offering both of these things. And I think, great, like, you can provide resources for all populations.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Samira. So the next question, it's kind of ones that we kind of seen throughout the chat and in the Q&A, and it's kind of going about what you said, learn as you go. What resources would you recommend to really further educate ourselves on DEI, especially when it comes to wording? We always want to make sure that any, collateral that we have out there, that the wording is correct, especially when we're talking about underrepresented and marginalized communities. We want to make sure it's the correct verbiage and not, making that community feel less in any way. So what resources would you recommend? And how can we better serve our population through specific types of wording and making sure it's always like up to date?
Yeah, I just led a session on this last week, specifically named about terminology. And I'll be frank, there is no easy way. Terminology is nuanced. Terminology constantly changes. Terminology is individualized. It's a group, where there's groups that have words that kind of identify a group. Some of them are assigned to that group. Some of them are brought up from that group. I think your aim should always be using the words that are sourced from members of that community. And there are some people in those communities that do not identify with those words, right? So there's people who say I'm Black, people say I'm African American, people say neither, I'm Jamaican, or I'm Nigerian, or I'm white, right? Like, there's not any one particular way. I think what's more important, and this is what gets to that kind of declaring what you mean by these words, is spending that time talking about which populations are we actually aiming to discuss here, right? Are we saying Black and Latino or Latinx? Are we saying Black and brown? Are we saying and why are we saying that group? Is it because of the experiences that people have because of that particular skin color? Is it because of their experiences that come out of housing this particular ethnic group? Or maybe it's not ethnic group, or maybe it's about economic experience. Like that's really what you're interested in addressing, right? So it's really getting clear on what you're trying to do, and then you can name that appropriately. And then around staying abreast on that terminology, I struggle with that too, as a person like really trying to be aware of multiple constituents of people, the beautiful diversity of our world, and how quickly information moves now. Like there's a lot more opportunity for people to choose the words that they want that self-identify, which is, but as a note, not always the way it used to be. Like groups didn't always have the option to select those words that claim, that describe their communities and have that be honored. So I really do want to be respectful of that. And I appreciate the question, because it seems like you're aiming to do the same. I try to listen into people in those communities. I join podcasts from people who are different in groups, or like get on a Clubhouse group and hear what people who are, who have disabilities are experiencing, or people who are differently abled. Like what's your experience like? What words speak to you? Like, right. So getting tapped in helps you build your cultural competence. Listening, I would say.
Thank you so much. I know that's something that a lot of us are struggling with when we're, writing and producing our collateral. We want to just be really mindful about the wording we're using. So I really appreciate your answer on that. So we're getting close on time, so I'm going to try to do a few more questions. So we have a couple of people asking, about metrics in terms of, program evaluation of their DEI work, measuring racial consciousness within the staff. Can you provide any, recommendations on how do we go about that process? What is that? What do those metrics look like to best understand like both the DEI work of the organization and also racial consciousness of the staff?
Yeah. So yeah, the I guess quantitative metrics around that work, right, rather than seeking that qualitative data, always challenging. I think anybody who's tried to measure like learning and development initiatives knows the challenge of actually being able to like equate, your investment to your outcome and so forth and so on. I will say in my work, I tend to I tend to do pre and post measures, just kind of like what were we aiming to accomplish here? Were we aiming to increase your awareness of different racial groups? Did that increase happen? Are we aiming, right? Like you can't, I don't think there is like one particular way to kind of capture everything and to really assess what is good enough in that regard as well. So I think the goal is to be in constant conversation and to know that you're moving closer towards your aim. So having metrics that reflect like, is it matching up with what I'm aiming to accomplish, I think is what I tend to focus on in my work, rather than kind of have you now reached racial consciousness, right? Because they're like, what is that measure? Who decides that when that has arrived?
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know that we weren't able to get to everyone's questions, and I'm so sorry. Everyone, thank you just so much for sending in all of your questions. Samira has very generously gave us her contact information. So if we didn't get to your question and you want to get Samira's expert opinion on it, please feel free to reach out to her. Samira, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, to really show us how we can design strategies for DEI in the workplace, how we can introduce these concepts to leadership. I truly appreciate it. And I know the TC community is really grateful for all the insights that you gave us. TC community, please make sure you stay tuned to all of our emails and social medias for details on future events, including Building Resilience During Change and Transition with alumna Barbara Phillips on April 7th at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We hope to see you at future TC alumni events. Until then, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.